but then I went to Chile to cover the transition of Chilean democracy from the dictatorship of General Pinochet, and I really got hooked then. I thought this is really important. This is worth covering. And I mean, Latin America is messed up in many ways, but when I was a kid, every single country in Latin America, bar a couple, were dictatorships.
Yeah.
Nowadays, every single country's a democracy. I mean, it's slightly flawed, but you look at other parts of the world, like parts of Africa, parts of Southeast Asia, where it hasn't really worked out. So and I developed a real closeness and fondness for Latin America. So I did my degree then in Latin American politics. Then luckily I got onto a BBC World Service trainee scheme, and BBC trainee schemes are like rocking horse.
They don't come around very often.
Quite lucky to get one of those.
Yeah.
And then it all took off from there. So my first job was as a junior foreign reporter for the BBC, based in Chile and Argentina and Colombia, doing what we call the Southern Cone countries in South America.
Yeah.
Great fun.
And you moved out there for that?
Yeah, me and my now wife, then girlfriend Becky, we lived in Santiago in Chile.
How long was that for?
2.5, 3 years. Great fun. That was the mid to late 90s.
That was no kids.
No kids. Playing cricket in Chile. Go off travelling. Covered my first ever conflict. There was a border war between Ecuador and Peru. First ever time I'd been to a conflict. It wasn't a big one.
What was that like? Because I think that we all, I suppose we sit there and we look at people who report on the conflict, and I sit there and think, wow, they sat there with a bulletproof vest on, taking bullets around them, but they're reporting, and your life's in your hands, right? Yeah,
it's just dangerous, and not everybody's going to do it. And you get used to it, you get better at it, you get the more you do. Now I've done lots of conflict reporting, but that was the first one.
You got to want to. The point I'm trying to, you got to want to do it, right?
Yeah, and you've got to be, you've got to be slightly, I wouldn't say fearless, but you've got to appreciate risk. You don't do it because you want to get shot at. You don't do it because you want to live life on the edge. You do it because you think there's something that's worth reporting.
And with that, if I delve a bit more into that, so it's not. I know the conflict, but is it to what is your why with that then? Why do you do?
Well, I remember once being in Libya. At the height of the Arab Spring in 2011-12, and it was really intense fighting.
Yeah,
it was just the end of Gaddafi's days, and I'd been in Libya many, many times, and I'd seen a lot of things, and it was getting really intense, and a lot of dead bodies, a lot of people being shot. Sadly, quite a few people I worked with, not from the BBC but other organisations, like Marie Colvin, Tim Hetherington. These people had been killed or were being, injured and killed.
Yeah.
But I remember one day thinking, why are we doing this? You'd every morning you'd get your kit on and you'd go down to the front line, and you think, why? There's got to be a reason to do it. You just don't want to turn up and be some sort of voyeur.
Yeah. Because
the more times you go to the front line, the greater the risk of something going wrong.
Of course, because you're skipping every time you don't get hurt. There's more risk of it, right?
And because a lot of the conflicts in recent years, like in Europe and in North Africa, have been quite accessible.
Yeah.
You get these almost like tourism junkies that turn up. I remember once, this guy, we were in Libya, and this guy turned up and we didn't know who he was. He wasn't from a big organisation. He said, I'm just blogging. And he was basically just some joyrider who fancied seeing a war,
right.
and we told him where to, that he wasn't welcome. The reason being is not, we didn't want other journalists around us, but if you're in a group of people and somebody gets injured or something happens, then you're responsible for them. You drop everything, and we didn't want any, if you like, hangers-on who weren't experienced, who didn't have the proper equipment and weren't really there doing anything worthwhile. And you do get quite a few of these people, voyeur journalists, who say, I've got a blog or I'm doing something, and actually they're just there as war junkies. So you get a bit of that, but so you've got a reason, why am I doing this? What is the and you've got to plan everything meticulously.
And what was that? What is your why?
It's well, that particular occasion, it was the end of Gaddafi's reign, if you like. It was 2 or 3 days before Gaddafi was killed, so we were reporting on what the pursuit of Colonel Gaddafi. He'd escaped from Tripoli as Tripoli fell, and he'd gone back to this city called Sirte in the middle of Libya, which is where he was from.
Yeah.
And it was getting really intense, heavy fighting. So we were going down, reporting on the search for Gaddafi.
But is it maybe what I'm trying to delve into, or the question I'm trying to get out is, you put your life at risk, and I've always thought about my friend who was in the Marines. He wrote a book actually when he came out, and he came out of the Marines. Sort of the question I asked him is like, you're putting your life at risk every time.
Yeah, but
his sort of why was all about, I'm serving my country. Your why with regards to reporting it. What?
Well, it's important. First time reporting. Look. Recently, I've been in Ukraine quite a lot, and and down in the south and east. So initially near Mariupol, and second time in Kharkiv, which is on the Russian border in the east.
Yeah.
And and mainly reporting on the effect of what Russia was doing on civilians. I mean, we saw some really harrowing stuff in hospitals and in towns around Mariupol and Zaporizhia. And I think it's important to tell those stories, the impact of what the Russian invasion is having on Ukrainians. And you follow up those stories. Now, I'm always interested in with conflict on the impact on people, when you see, I mean, I've been to Gaza many times and the West Bank, and I'm fascinated by the whole Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's something I've covered many times. It's complicated. It's
still it's ongoing now, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, even as we speak,
I read something
in the West Bank, and that is when we lived in Israel, and I covered the Middle East for off and on for 10 years or so. So I know the country really well. I know the Palestinian territories really well. And it's a fascinating story. It's a really tragic story because there's no peace there. Some people have turned their back on it because there's no end. This is a conflict that's been going on since 1948.
Do you see an end of those sort of conflicts? I know they've been going on so long, but
do you
see an end?
I think eventually, yeah. I mean, as I said, I look at Latin America. When I was growing up, every country, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Uruguay, Paraguay, all these countries were pretty brutal dictatorships.
Yeah.
And now, you look at Chile, you look at Argentina, you look at Brazil, they're all, they've got issues, but they're relatively stable democracies. And quite strong democracies, actually, as well. There was some people were worried last year that when things were going a bit tense in Brazil politically, that the military were going to step in, and absolutely no chance. I don't think that was going to happen at all.
Right.
And so you look at the Middle East, you look at parts of Africa, and you look at now what's happening in Ukraine, and you think, there will be, especially Ukraine. I think, Ukraine will eventually get resolved. Whether it's to everybody's satisfaction is a different story.
Yeah, I heard it this morning. They're progressing through, and they're getting some of the territory back, aren't they?
I think eventually that they will. I think it might take, bizarrely, something to happen to Putin inside Russia. Maybe internal pressure on Putin. Yeah. He looks quite strong at the minute, but I think there are weaknesses in Russia, and it might take the downfall of Putin to actually unlock what's happening in Ukraine. But again, those are the dynamics when you're there you report on. Sometimes you can do it from a distance. Remote journalism is improved a lot. We do a lot of stuff over video now. One thing we rely on a lot in journalism is something called UGC, is user generated content. That's basically people taking their own videos.
Yeah. And you have to comment on them.
Or you use them. They give you first-hand accounts of what's happening to them. The iPhone has changed, or the Android equivalent has changed everything. But you've got to be very careful with that material, though, because you haven't taken that material. You can't account that. And the BBC is now doing a lot of stuff with verification. We won't use a video or we won't use material unless we can really verify it, or we know where it's from, when it was taken, and we can account for its bona fides.